What was the hardest part of putting everything together? If I was to take a guess, I would have said fundraising. Was there anything that was more challenging in the journey of putting Whoop together?
Whoop was on the edge of dying a few times. And in those moments, I just kept picking up the phone. I kept calling. I kept trying to find a solution. I felt like I didn't really know what I was doing to my body while I was training. And it took a few years of doing research to realize that what I was actually going to do was start a company.
Why did you resist the idea of step counts from the early days until it eventually came on, I think a month or so ago?
You have to predict what the world's going to look like in 2 or 3 years. You and I could sit here and say, oh, this would be a good idea for a phone or a good idea for a watch. The problem is it might be a good idea today.
Today, yeah.
It's going to now take us 2 years to build it. And in 2 years, is it a good idea still? So the GCC is more sedentary than other places around the world. The latest bedtime on Whoop, it's between Doha and Riyadh, I think. But the average bedtime is like 2 a.m. Whoop has now raised $400 million. And the first $400,000 was harder than the last $200 million. Whoop has a podcast which I host, and we're on close to episode 300.
300?
Yeah.
Have you done all 300?
I've done a lot of them, not all of them.
So I mean, your title should be CEO of Whoop/podcaster.
I know. It's crazy. I said initially we'll do 10 of them and see how it goes. And now
look at that. And it just took a life of its own, huh?
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. What was it like getting the GOATs on for a conversation that you guys published a few months back?
Cristiano.
At an altitude of 37,000 feet, we soar, with a rich legacy of honoring our guests and a unique style that has resonated with the world for 78 years. We carry the name of our country on every journey and across every sky. We are Saudi. We welcome you in our own way. We shape our present and build our future. Saudia, our name and country, our style and approach, striving for excellence in everything we do. This is how we fly.
Amazing. I mean, I grew up a fan of his, and I hadn't gotten to know him that well. I knew that he was wearing Whoop because we saw in his photos that he had a Whoop strap on, and it had been like that for a couple of years. And so finally, his team reached out to see if we were interested in doing something together. I went to meet him it was maybe January or February in Riyadh. And, we spent a couple hours together. We really had a good time, got to know one another. And I think the side of him that I hadn't seen before was just what a sports scientist he was. I mean, this is a man who's deeply obsessed with his body and his training and everything that goes into his body and how to think about his body, sleep, recovery. These were things that were really top of mind for him. And he took out his app. All of a sudden, he's asking me questions about his data. He really wanted to understand certain things. And he also had a lot of recommendations of his own. So my reaction was, okay, here's a guy who, one, has an unbelievable following and fan base, but two, really understands data and really authentically has a mission around performance the same way Whoop has a mission around performance. And so from there, we got talking about doing a partnership together. And then the next time I came back to Riyadh, I recorded that podcast with him, and we spent a couple more hours together. And I think it came out well.
I don't think anyone. Maybe you could throw LeBron James in that equation, but I don't think anyone takes care of his body as much as he does.
I think that's fair. I mean, I've certainly met a lot of the world's best athletes, and what they have in common is this obsession with being the best that extends well beyond the court or practice or even training. You know, when they're sitting right here and they're deciding, am I going to sip that drink in front of me? They're trying to be the best athlete in the world. You know, when there's a collection of snacks, they're saying, I'm trying to be the best athlete in the world. When it's a question of, should I go see my family right now, or should I roll out more and do the ice bath it's just unbelievable the number of decisions they make in a day that point towards one very specific thing. And there's a lot of talented athletes who never get to their potential because somewhere in that equation, they're not allocating that time. But greatness has a cost. I mean, it has a sacrifice. There's huge trade-offs.
I think sacrifice and discipline are maybe the two components that can allow you to play soccer up until 39, 40. It's funny because LeBron is approaching that as well, and they're kind of on the same timeline. Whereas you can see other athletes who are 33, 34, who are pretty much retired at that point because they didn't sacrifice, because they chose to do something that wasn't taking care of their body, or they decided to be a little less disciplined. And I think that's where it's won or lost.
I think that's right. I mean, it's discipline and consistency, and not that many athletes have it to the level that Ronaldo has it. I don't think anyone actually has it to the level he has it. You could put LeBron in a similar camp. Tom Brady played quarterback until 45, so I think he's in the same camp.
That's crazy.
But there's a playbook for those who want it. It's just how badly do you want it?
Before we get into Whoop, I wanted to ask about you, schooling days, from what you can remember of it, college, early days of your career, well before Whoop started. What was your childhood like in general, from what you can recall?
So I grew up on the North Shore of Long Island, which is about 45 minutes outside Manhattan. I was kind of a hyperactive kid. I was an only child. I was playing, a dozen sports and kind of going from one thing to the next. As an only child, I spent a lot of time around adults, so I was always around my parents and their friends. My parents are quite different. My dad, Egyptian immigrant, came to the U.S. when he was 22 years old with very little. And over the time of his career was able to kind of rise the ranks in finance through some combination of charisma and persistence. I think my dad sort of very stereotypically is what you might call street smart. And my mother, very different in her own right, much more book smart, much more analytical, phenomenal writer, very well educated, went to schools like Exeter and Princeton and wrote for a long time. And so with my parents, I think I also observed two different extremes in terms of how to solve problems. You have a wall in front of you. Do you want to analyze it and figure out how you can scale up and around it? Or do you want to run through it? And of course, you don't realize these things when you're a kid, but now looking back on it as an entrepreneur for the last 12 years of my life, being able to sort of borrow from those two extremes is a very useful tool. I went to St. Paul's, which was boarding school in New Hampshire. So we both share high schooling in New Hampshire. And that was a great experience for me because I really got to get better at some of the sports I mentioned earlier. I got very good at playing squash, which I would then go on to play in college. And I think also going to a boarding school gives you a certain sense of independence. You're really kind of alone from you're separated, I should say, from your parents. It's like you're 14 years old. And so you have to build a certain sense of resilience and self-discipline to figure out how to, when you should do your schoolwork and when you can screw around and, you get in trouble and these sorts of things and you learn from it. I went to Harvard as an 18-year-old. I was playing squash there. I was technically studying government and economics, initially at least. And I felt like I didn't really know what I was doing to my body while I was training as an athlete. And so that became the early seeds of starting Whoop, where I started to question, how do you train properly? How do you recover properly? I just, up until that point, I just always thought more was more. More training equals more fitness equals better. And I was someone who used to overtrain. So you kind of get fitter and fitter and fitter, and then all of a sudden you fall off a cliff and you don't know why. And that problem of overtraining was one that didn't just affect me, but it turns out affects 70% of athletes. And so I started to ask this question of, well, how can you prevent overtraining?
Is that where the idea of Whoop was sparked, would you say, when you were in Harvard?
Absolutely. I mean, I had the idea for Whoop probably from the age of 19. Now, to be clear, it was more that it was really obvious to me that there was a problem. The problem was human beings have no idea what's going on inside their bodies. Or more specifically, athletes don't know how to train, don't know how to recover. And it took a few years of doing research to realize that what I was actually going to do was start a company. But when I was, 19 or 20, I wasn't thinking I was going to start a company. In fact, it never really occurred to me that was the path I was about to go on. I just became deeply obsessed with solving a problem.
I think it's been said many times that starting a company is one of the hardest things you'll ever have to do. As far as you're concerned, it was just an idea. And here you are a few years later, probably looking to raise capital and trying to understand the crux of what it takes to run a business.
That's right. I mean, I became an entrepreneur before I knew what an entrepreneur was. Whoop wasn't just the first company I started. It was my first full-time job. I mean, I really, at the outset, didn't know what I was doing.
What was the first company you started?
No, Whoop was the first company.
Whoop was the first.
Yeah.
Okay.
My point was just to say that, like, it was my first job. It was my first company. It was all the first, I didn't have a lot of experience going into it. But there's an advantage to being naive in the sense that you don't even know what you don't know. And you can challenge normal assumptions and you can take things on in your own way. In the case of Whoop, I saw the world a little differently than others at that time, which is to say that most folks in and around sports and athletics were really focused on exercise. How can we measure more about exercise? But when I asked coaches or athletes what their problems were, it often came back to training properly. It came back to that question of overtraining, and it came back to injury. And so I thought that there was a mismatch between what people were asking for and what they actually needed. They were asking for exercise equipment, but what they needed was an understanding around recovery and an understanding around sleep. What if it wasn't that I overtrained, it was that I underrested. So it was just a different way of looking at things. And that led me to do all this physiology research around sleep and around heart rate variability and resting heart rate and VO2 max and these different biomarkers that if you could measure, you could all of a sudden be able to really understand the human body. And so I started the company that summer of 2012.
12 years ago. Thank you for hitting on that word. One of my favorite quotes is, what gets measured gets managed. And that's exactly what you guys did. You gave a tool for people to allow to measure both their work and what you so rightly said, the rest, which is equally as important.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We set out to build a tool that could replace existing medical technology. And if you go back in time to say 2011, 2012, the best way to measure sleep then was what's called the PSG machine, which is gold standard for sleep, but it's a sleep lab. You go in, you have all these nodes connected to your body. You get put in a bedroom with human beings watching you while you sleep and cameras, and they score your sleep in a laboratory. That's like how someone would get, diagnosed with sleep apnea. The gold standard I realized for measuring recovery was to be able to measure heart rate variability, but that required an electrocardiogram. Again, expensive equipment, $20,000 probably at a hospital. And then the third, which was sort of the gold standard for measuring intensity of exercise, was the chest strap, the heart rate monitor.
I remember seeing those.
And that was, 30 years old. First chest strap came out in 1982, and it really didn't change all that much for 30 years. So I was looking at these three technologies and I was saying, okay, if we could put all of those technologies into a small form factor, we would then be able to measure sleep, recovery, and exercise. And that would be the foundation upon which we could build a whole app and tool for coaching.
Why did you resist the idea of step counts from the early days until it eventually came on, I think a month or so ago?
Well, I would say that Whoop has been successful due to a fairly maniacal focus. So when I say that we really wanted to be able to measure sleep, recovery, and strain, we really put all of our resources to those three things, and then we blocked everything else out. So we said no to steps, but we also said no to a lot of other things. Whoop doesn't have a watch face on it. It doesn't have an interface. It doesn't do push notifications or phone calls. Or you can't, flag an Uber with your Whoop, right? Like we just didn't do any of that stuff. It doesn't have a microphone. It doesn't have a radio in it. It's a very focused product. And what that allowed us to do is focus all of our engineering efforts on health monitoring. And in turn, that allowed Whoop to become the very best at health monitoring, not just for an athlete, but for anyone.
Do one thing and be the best at it.
Exactly. And especially if you're going to build hardware, because hardware, you have to predict what the world's going to look like in 2 or 3 years. You and I could sit here and say, oh, this would be a good idea for a phone or a good idea for a watch. The problem is it might be a good idea today.
Yeah.
It's going to now take us 2 years to build it. And in 2 years, is it a good idea still? So you have to have an ambitious thing that you're going to be great at. And then in the process of actually achieving that greatness, you have to say no to everything else. And that's a very hard balance.
Any revamps on the horizon for you guys?
We're always developing new technology. And just the way the Whoop business works is that it's a subscription. So if you sign up as a member, you are always going to be getting the latest and greatest technology from Whoop. So when we come up with a new feature, we don't hold it back and wait to sell it to you in a year. We'll immediately release it. So people who signed up in the last 12 months didn't realize they were about to get a strength trainer feature, which measures your weightlifting, or a stress monitor feature that measures your stress, or a coach in the app powered by OpenAI that you can talk to. Like these are all features that we've added as we've gone. And with hardware, by being a member, you're going to be eligible for any future hardware upgrades that come. So it's a very different business model. Most companies that develop hardware sell you a hardware and then don't innovate on it at all and then try to sell you the next hardware, right? So that this and this then look different. And they also try to release hardwares every 12 months. So you constantly have to keep buying something new. Whereas Whoop will release a hardware and then we'll be adding functionality to it. We just did this very recently with step counting, where we added step counting and updated everyone's hardware with firmware such that it can now measure steps. So these are the examples of how Whoop innovates in a different way than other companies.
And I appreciate that because I'm sick and tired of buying new devices because whether it's the charger that changed or the new phone and sorry to name drop, but Apple are the kings of this.
Totally.
And for you guys to not go down that route, which is probably a more profitable route, and to stick to your guns and what you're doing is, I think, one of the reasons why you guys are number one in the business that you're in.
I think so. I mean, we've built a very deep relationship with our member base. And at the end of the day, because Whoop is a subscription, it puts our members and us on the same train. You know, a lot of companies sell you something and then they're worried about finding the next person. Whereas we get you on Whoop and we want to keep you on Whoop forever because you're making a buying decision every month about Whoop. Whoop is a subscription. You know, you can cancel at any time. So we feel this deep commitment to constantly be evolving with you. And on that point, you know, health monitoring is not a one-time decision, right? How you think about your health changes and evolves depending on what's going on in your life. Maybe you joined Whoop because you were training for a marathon, but then you now have done the marathon and you just got a new job. And guess what? You're just trying to survive. You know, you're stressed and you're dealing with stuff and you just need to get by. I can't tell you how many messages I've gotten from people who, you know, unfortunately got some kind of an illness or a sickness or a disease, and they're trying to manage through that. You know, a woman who goes from having a normal life to being pregnant to then having a newborn. Those are all different chapters. And also say that every human being goes through different chapters in life. And we felt that if we designed the best product, we were going to evolve with you throughout each of those chapters, which in turn would mean that the reason you joined Whoop today might be different than the reason you're still on it.
Yeah. Which is, I think, normal as you evolve through life.
Yeah.
I remember when I got mine a year ago, I was more interested in recovery and sleep. And today, you know, I'm almost like an expert in all the bells and whistles that are provided in on the data, which is just endless. And now, additionally, we can say step count. I don't know why people obsess about step counts. I think because we don't walk that much in Saudi. So when eventually, like if I'm in New York or London, I'm like, can I get 20K steps? And I hate having to measure it on my phone, which isn't very accurate. Now I can measure it on this.
Well, I'll give you a few region-specific statistics. So the GCC is more sedentary than other places around the world, has the latest bedtime on Whoop. It's between Doha and Riyadh, I think, but the average bedtime is like 2 a.m.
You know our secrets.
Whereas the earliest bedtime, I think, is Australia at like 10 p.m. So just think about how different those two countries. Yeah,
we are
amazing.
Night owls.
Yeah,
it's rush hour in Jeddah and Riyadh on the weekends, 11 p.m. onwards.
Right.
You know, whereas in LA, 4:05 is jam packed between maybe 4 and 7. Then it's chilling 8 o'clock onwards. No. Yeah. We don't have it like that. From 11 p.m. till 2 or 3 a.m., the big streets of Riyadh and Jeddah is a parking lot. That's where you're getting the Whoop data from. You know our secrets, huh?
الآن ليس الجديد الأفضل على الإطلاق، نكهة قوية، كرمشة مثالية.
A friend of mine who's been an avid Whoop guy from the early days said, Mo, I can't believe you're getting Will on. Can you please ask him with regards to the charger? A lot of people lose that piece of charger. Is there any way, or why hasn't there been a charging portal on the actual device as opposed to the bracket that slips onto it?
So I think you're describing the modular charger.
Yes.
So one of the principles early on we had with Whoop was this idea of 24/7 data. You know, the key to really understanding your body is to measure it 24/7, as in you have this continuous stream of data. Well, if you have to take a product off to charge it, you lose that 24/7 nature. And so we wanted to give people the ability to charge the product on their body so they never had to take it off. And so that's why we invented the modular charger. And, you know, I'd say for the most part, it's been a pretty novel and positive invention for Whoop.
Makes perfect sense now.
Yeah.
I knew there was a good reason behind that. What was the hardest part of putting everything together? If I was to take a guess, I would have said fundraising. Was there anything that was more challenging in the journey of putting Whoop together all the way back from 2012?
Well, I think building the technology itself was really hard. Now, that also required a lot of capital, but just to say it, like we were building hardware in an industry in which Nike, Adidas, Under Armour, Puma were all bringing products to market. So you had the best sports apparel brands, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Intel. So you had all the tech companies. And then there was probably 10 or 15 startups. So it was a hyper competitive space with the best companies in the world and teams that were much bigger than ours. And yet we were able to build technology that was more innovative and more accurate, and has since now been more successful than a lot of those companies. And so that was the hardest thing. We can talk about raising capital for the business too. I mean, that was enormously challenging. I think one reason it was challenging, just to say it, is that I had never fundraised before. I mean, I was 22 years old trying to figure all of this out. And up to that point in my life, you know, sure, I had some setbacks, but I had been pretty successful with different things. I went to good schools, I got good grades, that sort of thing. And I mean, all of a sudden I was getting rejected like every day, multiple times a day. You know, you go try to recruit an engineer. Hey, I would love if you work with me on this. No, you know, I'm trying to raise $300,000, you know, yeah, I can't, I'm not going to invest in this. Sorry. Like, and I just kept hearing those things over and over again. So that was very challenging in the early stages. I mean, Whoop has now raised $400 million, and the first $400,000 was harder than the last 200 million. And I say that just because I think it's easy as a first-time founder or an entrepreneur, or really anyone trying to build a business. It's easy to say like, oh, I'm having trouble raising this small amount of money. And look at this entrepreneur over here who's raised so much money. I could never do that. And it's not true. It's actually just that you need to get better at it. And as your business gets better, it'll become more attractive to investors to invest.
It's like compound interest.
Yeah.
Much harder in the beginning. And then eventually, a lot of people quit when they're on the verge of making it. And I think perseverance, I can't imagine how difficult it was for you to hear no's on the $200,000 and $300,000 investments that you really needed, and that most likely molded you into the person you are today.
I think that's right. And I think there's a little bit of a personality thing where if someone says, no, you can't do it,
oh yeah,
you either get discouraged by that,
yeah,
or it's like you've made a secret list in your mind of all the people who said no, and now you're going to prove them wrong. Yeah. So I think I was a little bit more the latter, where even as I was getting these rejections, I was able to use it as fuel rather than discouragement.
On the subject of recovery, Whoop for Recovery, which is something amazing that you put together, what's your average recovery percentage, if you can let us in on that?
It's about 60%. Like if I looked at my recovery over the entire year, on average, it'd be around 60%.
Are you happy with that?
Yes, because I run a stressful job, right? And I still exercise, 5 days a week, and I travel a lot. So those things essentially pull your recovery down. But my recovery is not like red very often. And therefore, it's because I'm able to sleep. It's because I've developed good habits around meditating or around cold plunge and sauna or around diet. And so those sorts of things offset all the challenge. It's interesting, like if you look at really good professional athletes' data, their recoveries on average are not going to be like green recoveries. And it's because if your recovery is always green, it's almost like a sign you're not pushing yourself hard enough, right? Like you want to push yourself to the point where at times your body needs to recover. But you don't want to be in a place where you're often redlining, like, you're 15% or 20% recovery, that sort of thing.
Between meditation, sleep, ice, what has been the most effective method of recovery that you've noticed on your body?
Well, I find meditation personally has been one of the biggest unlocks for me as a human being. I mean, I would go slightly beyond recovery in talking about it. I think when you speak of recovery, it's you can talk about breathing techniques. So let's say right now we were stressed out, and we wanted to get quickly into a state of being more relaxed. If you just exhale longer than you inhale, all of a sudden you can put your body into more of a parasympathetic state, and so you can be more relaxed. And that might be good for recovery of the moment. When I talk about meditation, I'm talking a little bit less about breathing, although that's a component. I'm talking more about recovery of the mind. And I do it every morning, in the neighborhood of 20 minutes a morning. And it's kind of become a non-negotiable for me. When I was 24 years old, I was really stressed building this company. I was kind of run down, strung out. I probably raised about $20 million at that point. I had a team of 25 people, and both of those figures just felt totally overwhelming. The business itself wasn't doing very well. And I hadn't really learned how to cope with stress. I was drinking a lot of coffee throughout the day. I was drinking a lot of alcohol at night. Like I was strung out and I didn't know how to cope. And I found meditation as a tool to really find balance and reflection. The act of meditating, you close your eyes and then you start breathing. And then I do a mantra-based meditation. So you'll start saying a mantra in your head. And what happens is you'll be repeating this mantra, and then all of a sudden ideas will come in as you're saying the mantra. And you get to decide, well, do I want to go back to saying the mantra, or do I want to examine the thought? And if you go back to saying the mantra, you kind of push the thought along. It's like picture you're the mountain and there's clouds floating by. And then all of a sudden you might say, oh, actually, I want to pause here. I've got a podcast with Mo today. I want to think about what that might be like and sort of visualize where that's going to be and what I'm going to say, or, fill in the blank, whatever you might have that day. Maybe it's a challenge in work. Maybe it's a challenge in your personal life. Maybe it's something you hadn't even thought of in 6 weeks. And all of a sudden it's now in your mind and you realize it's important. So it allowed me to develop this ability to sort of look at my thoughts in the third person. And in a way, what that did outside of meditation was it allowed me to look at myself in the third person. Whereas before I might find myself in a meeting and all of a sudden I'm yelling and you're yelling and I'm like, wow, this really escalated in the back of my mind. Why are we both yelling? And it's like you're trying to catch up to your emotional state. Whereas in this aftermath of learning to meditate properly, I found that I would hear a whisper in my mind, oh, Will's about to get angry. And before I got angry, and it was like, oh, well, should I get angry right now? Is that the best way to approach this? And it's just made me feel much more in control. And so the benefits of meditating, I think, are both the act of doing it, but also the way it makes you feel throughout your life.
Has it resulted in a more calmer Will?
Definitely. Yeah.
More awareness?
Definitely.
I think in the high-paced life we live today compared to 100 years ago, meditation is more crucial than ever. I mean, these notifications on their own can drive anyone towards anxiety and panic attacks.
I think that's right. And yeah, I mean, I think our brains today are overstimulated and our mind and our bodies are like understimulated. You want to kind of switch that equation. If you compare it to our ancestors that were just on their feet all day and, at times very relaxed with their minds, like, we have devices that are constantly pinging us, constantly want our attention, constantly trying to give you a dopamine hit. And so learning how to find that balance. And I think it's important to really push your body and exercise. And I think it's really important to relax your mind.
If you just look at the way we eat, I mean, back in the hunter-gatherer days, they would walk a few miles maybe so they can get their meal. And 100 years ago, it was, or let's say 200 years ago, you'd probably get on your horse to go somewhere and then do a bit of walking. And then 50 years ago, we'd actually go to restaurants. And today we go to our front door, and God knows what, in 10 years, someone's probably going to feed us. My point is that we walk a lot less today just to get our food.
Yeah, I think, look, being completely inactive is something that will kill you. Even if your appearance is fine, like your physiology is not. You got to work your heart. You got to work your lungs. You need to develop muscle. These are things that are just demonstrated to be able to prove great longevity.
Mm-hmm. The health sector in Saudi Arabia. Gyms were kind of non-existent. Correct me if I'm wrong. 20 years ago, there wasn't much. Now there's a big block, Fitness Time, Gold's Gym. There's basically a state-of-the-art gym every mile or two down the road in any major Saudi city. This wasn't the case 20 years ago. For goodness sake, I mean, I remember gyms IPOing on the Saudi Stock Exchange. That's how well they were doing, right? Yeah, Fitness Time was on the Saudi Stock Exchange. And that's a testament to, I mean, they're not going to build it if there wasn't a demand for it, that Saudis are like, you know what? It's time to get healthy. There is this global craze towards health that Saudi wanted to get, and the GCC wanted to get on that bandwagon.
Well, I'll say this about Saudi. I mean, I haven't seen a country in my lifetime go through a bigger transformation than the one Saudi's going through right now. I first came to Saudi Arabia, believe it or not, 20 years ago. And I was essentially tagging along with my dad, who was on a business trip. And, you know, look, it was a long time ago, so how much do you remember? But I don't remember there being that much going on.
There wasn't.
And, you know, we went to a restaurant and, you know, only men there. And it had it was stiffer energy, right? Or more conservative energy. And, you know, now you walk around various areas of Riyadh, and it's booming. I mean, it's energetic and it's booming. And if you just chart where it's gone in the last 6 years to where it'll probably be in the next 6, or dare I say 60 years, I think it's very exciting. And a lot of that comes from having a vision. You know, the leadership in the region has a vision and is executing against it. And when I meet young people in Saudi, they're very optimistic, you know, in a way that a lot of countries unfortunately aren't. You know, young citizens in a lot of countries aren't. And so I think that those are all things that make me excited about Saudi Arabia. And for Whoop, I think that we've seen a lot of growth here, and I expect it'll probably continue. And I think it's in part because of what you said, like there's a push for people to be healthier and exercise more. And I also think that innovation here is really accepted and encouraged.
Yeah, I think we certainly attracted the eyes of the world. We, you know, looking at the investments we made in football, soccer, a lot of people are like, what's going on in Saudi? You see the Asian Games in 2027. That's going to be in Saudi. We're the only country to bid for the World Cup, and hopefully next month that becomes confirmed for 2034. So we're certainly attracting the eyes of the world, and certainly I think that the sporting sector is leading that.
Absolutely. When I travel, and I travel all around the world, the thing I'm always looking for is, do I feel more optimistic or more pessimistic when I'm in a country? And how are the people around me in that regard? And here it's certainly optimism. And to the credit of a lot of the GCC, I've spent time in Qatar, I've spent time in the UAE. You just talked about Dubai. I first started going to Dubai 8 years ago because we partnered with the World Expo 2020, and we developed a program for worker welfare where we helped the country and the city collect health information to essentially have construction sites be built in a healthier manner. And we made all these recommendations around optimal shift times and how to recover properly and hydration and these different things. And so I just started going to Dubai probably every 6 months, 8 months, and watch that city continue to grow and rise. And
Awesome city.
yeah, and then I started going to Doha maybe in the last 2 years, and obviously the World Cup created a whole boom for them of innovation, and now I've been coming to KSA because of our partnership with Ronaldo and because the product's growing here and because of so many great leaders like yourself. So yeah, overall, I would say I'm very excited about the region.
People think that it's a rivalry and we don't want the next country to succeed. No, we actually are very united. The GCC as a whole. We do believe that a rising tide lifts all boats.
I sense that actually, because I've spent time with leaders in all three countries. And I think there's a feeling of if they're doing well, if they're attracting new companies, if they're attracting new tourists, well, that's going to have an afterglow for us. Those people are going to come here too.
Yeah. And maybe even the unsung heroes like Bahrain, which is a tiny island just east of Saudi Arabia. These guys got Formula One in 2004. They just celebrated 20 years of hosting that event. That doesn't come easy.
Totally. And Kuwait, I'm excited to spend more time there. So I think there's a number of exciting developments in the region.
Even in your home, your dad's homeland, Egypt, I mean, what they're doing as well, there's a huge sports city that is under construction right now. And they want a piece of the cake as well. And it's exciting to see what's happening there infrastructurally.
Absolutely.
You have access to an unlimited amount of data from users globally. What would be one burning question that you would like to seek through your analytics? Like if there's one thing you wanted to know about people that, you aren't able to get through your analytics, is there something that you would like more information on as far as your users are concerned?
Well, I'll start with what we're doing, which I think is very hard in its own right. And it's to say, what is the personal recipe for you to be healthier? And what does that mean? Well, it's one, having algorithms that are analyzing your specific data and seeing within your data, what are areas where you could be better, more effective. Then it's essentially taking what we would call like a digital twin of you and looking at that twin versus all of the people who are quite similar to you. So, maybe there's 100,000 people on Whoop who look exactly like you. Not exactly, but same age, gender, weight, height. They work out 4 times a week. They have a stressful job. They have a newborn. Okay, we'll check off all these boxes that sort of put you into a category of, well, let's now say amongst that group, you're in the top 30%, right? So there's 70% of people who are less fit. There's 30% of people who are more fit, right? Okay, well, what are those 30% of people doing that you're not? And now we start to create a recipe for you where it's taking the 2, 3, 4 things that group's doing and presenting them to you. And some of them you may be able to do and some of them you may not. Maybe you can't go from 4 days to 5 days exercise, but maybe you could go to bed and wake up at the same time more regularly. Maybe you could have a slightly different bedtime routine. Maybe you eat too close to bed, and you start to carve out these little recipes for people to essentially have the perfect health on Whoop.
It's crazy how small changes can really lead to big results.
Oh, that's one of the biggest themes of Whoop.
Like I think of a rocket taking off. If it went 1 degree east where it shouldn't have, you're talking, you're going to a different solar system. Small changes can lead to big results. And an interesting one that you said that maybe the one thing that you're not doing is that you're sleeping 1 hour later. Go to sleep 1 hour earlier, and that can change so many things.
Or just be even more consistent about when you go to bed and wake up. That's one of the interesting things we discovered about Whoop. Going to bed and waking up at the same exact time in itself gives you a physiological boost. So when you meet people who say, oh, I only need 6 hours of sleep or whatever, often that's not true. But what's also normally happening is they always go to bed at 11 and they always wake up at 5. And so in turn, they've actually been able to create a circadian rhythm for themselves that's very normal. And that in turn is also making the amount of time they spend in bed have higher restorative sleep, right? Sleep, the time you spend in bed is not actually the time you spend asleep, right? And so if you spend 7 hours in bed, maybe 6 hours of that is sleep. And even amongst the 6 hours, some of it's light sleep and some of it is REM and slow wave sleep. Light sleep doesn't matter that much, whereas REM and slow wave, that's like where all the magic happens, right? REM is when your mind is repairing cognitively. It's when you have deep dreams. If you can't seem to remember your dreams or you don't seem to be having dreams, it's probably a sign you don't get enough REM sleep. Slow wave sleep is when you produce 95% of your body's human growth hormone. So people who say they're not getting the results they want in the gym, well, that you might not be getting enough slow wave sleep because you don't get stronger in the gym. You actually break your muscles down in the gym. You get stronger during slow wave sleep. If you're in the back half of life, you're over 50 or 60 years old, slow wave sleep is what's going to prevent you from getting injured. Or if you have a nagging injury, slow wave sleep is going to be what helps you recover from that injury. So also to say REM and slow wave sleep are super important. And it turns out that two people can spend 7 hours in bed and get very different REM and slow wave sleep. Because the excuse, you've probably heard this too, but the excuse I hear all the time about sleep is, I don't have enough time. Okay, how much time are you spending today while trying to sleep? 6 hours? 6.5? Let's make that 6.5 as optimal as possible. And when you start thinking about it that way, you're like, okay, yeah, I should probably measure this. I should probably start managing it. I mean, to me, it's crazy that people would spend a third of their life or a quarter of their life and just have no idea what happened.
I think the same people that are telling you we don't have time to sleep are probably on Instagram for at least an hour a day.
Well, there you go.
Scrolling. Sleep is paramount.
Yeah. There's a lot of destructive habits you can cut out to get more sleep. But I always just say, let's take whatever amount of time you're already spending trying to sleep and make it better.
Travel must really screw schedules. It must really affect your sleep cycle and routine. If back in Boston, if you're in bed at 10 and up at 5 or 6 a.m., when you're on a flight to Saudi or anywhere that you go to, that screws that completely, doesn't it?
It does. I think I've built a pretty good system for fighting jet lag. So like yesterday I got in on a red-eye flight. I was up all day for meetings, went to bed and just woke up and here we are doing this podcast. And I feel fine right now. And so what are some things that can help with jet lag? One is to try to get on the new time zone as quickly as possible. So even starting, before your flight, can you go to bed earlier so that you're anticipating the new time zone that you're going to be on? I tried to sleep on the plane, at a time that would have been like 6 p.m. my time, but was actually, early in the morning or late at night Saudi time. So I was trying to get myself onto that schedule. And then when I got here, whatever it takes, caffeine, some exercise, like you got to keep yourself awake. Don't let yourself take a 4-hour nap or something because that's going to mess up your circadian rhythm. And then I went to bed at, kind of late into the evening to get on the right time zone. Drank a ton of water. I did sauna, steam, cold plunge routine. That kind of shocks your system in a good way. Gets you more grounded. Water is really one of the keys. Another key is actually not eating on flights. So if you eat on a plane, what happens is your body, since it's at altitude, it is shutting down all sort of unnecessary bodily functions. And digestion is one of them. So your body actually doesn't know how to digest when you're on a plane. And so in turn, it makes you very lethargic. It makes your body less optimal. And so I'll fast when I'm on planes. So, 13-hour flights and I didn't eat anything. And then in turn, when you get on the new time zone, try to eat on the right clock. So eat breakfast at breakfast time, lunch at lunchtime, dinner at dinner time, so that it gets your body calibrated.
I'm never going to eat on a plane again.
You know who I actually learned that from, funny enough, was a flight attendant, which is interesting because if you pay attention to long flights, you almost never see flight attendants eating.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think it's because they've realized if they eat on the plane, they get very tired and can't do their jobs.
I never feel good when I eat on the plane. You're already dehydrated, and the food, which I think they add extra salt to, only adds to the dehydration.
Totally. It's not natural how good salt tastes on planes.
Yeah. Yeah. We spoke about lots of self-care tips, meditation, sleep, recovery. What about reading? Are you much of a reader?
I do like reading. I especially like reading in the evening, kind of help wind down. I also listen to audiobooks too, so that can help.
Any favorite books?
Let's see. Recently, I read the Walter Isaacson book on Elon Musk, which I liked a lot. A book I read kind of over and over again is this book called Shoe Dog, which is about Phil Knight building Nike.
I'm 2 chapters in. It's
which
amazing.
Is a company I really love and admire. And I'm also someone who will start books and not finish them or jump around in chapters. It's a liberating moment in your life when you realize you don't have to read a book from start to finish and you can kind of pick and choose at chapters and whatnot.
Can I recommend one?
Please.
Atomic Habits.
Yes.
So good. I listened to it on audio and now I'm on the hardback or paperback, whatever it is. But I mean, if you can learn one thing from a book, it's a good book. And he talks about doing habits so that you make things more difficult for you to reach if you have a problem resisting it. He went to the extremity of saying that if you find yourself watching TV too much, put it in the closet. Next time you're going to want to reach for the TV, you're going to have to go through the process of getting it from the closet and plugging it in. Awesome book. Highly, highly recommended. And another one, actually, Obstacles is the Way. The Obstacles is the Way. Is
Ryan Holiday, right?
Ryan Holiday, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I've read most of his books. I interviewed him on the Whoop podcast at one point too. I think he wears Whoop. He's a very thoughtful guy. Ego's the enemy.
Ego's the enemy, yeah. His titles are like
is the key.
Words to live by, these titles.
You can learn a lot just from reading the titles.
Almost don't need to read the book, just live by that quote.
Yeah.
Are you a movie guy? Do you watch movies?
I do.
Yeah? Any favorites there?
The movie I would say my wife and I have rewatched the most is Interstellar.
Such a good movie. We need a sequel.
It was so good. McConaughey.
So good.
Space travel.
It's funny, my wife and I rewatched it 2 months ago. It's coming up to 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. I think it came out 2012, 2013.
And the graphics in that movie are unbelievable.
Unreal.
Christopher Nolan's such a good director.
Yeah. Classic. When I said that needs a sequel, someone told me, he was like, Mo, the greatest movie of all time does not need a sequel. He was pushing to the fact that was one of the masterpieces of filmmaking.
جديد. اكسر الروتين مع أطباقنا الجديدة من بيتزا هات جدة. بيتزا هات جدة، ذوق طعم الثقة معنا.
Do you have any quotes that resonate with you deeply or ones that you like to live your life by?
One I think about a lot is Miles Davis, music is the time between beats. Miles Davis being a famous jazz musician. Music is the time between beats. What does that mean? Well, the way I interpret that is in building a company, there's such a focus on the next milestone. We're at this stage, but it's going to be great when we're at this stage. We're worth $100 million today. Wow, what's it going to mean when we're worth $1 billion? We're worth $1 billion today. What's it going to mean when we're worth $5 billion? Worth $5 billion, $10 billion. We have this many people on Whoop. What about when we have this many people on Whoop? You know, I just hired this person, but what about when I hire this and this person? And your mind is constantly doing this, where it's creating a new goalpost for what success is. And look, you can drive towards all those things, and you should, but they can't be what define your life experience. And they certainly can't be the thing that you correlate with your own happiness or personal satisfaction. And so the reminder I have with myself, and I try to bring gratitude into this as well, because the more grateful you are, that produces serotonin. Serotonin makes you happy. Dopamine also makes you happy, but if you're just creating dopamine based on telling yourself these new milestones are coming and that's what's going to make you happy, you're going to burn out on dopamine. So you have to balance serotonin with dopamine to have this chemical in your brain that's, making you happy and feeling fulfilled. And so I am constantly reminding myself, like, be grateful for where you are today, be grateful for the process, be grateful for the challenge. And what that does is it gets you a little bit off of this dopamine flywheel that it's the next milestone. It's the next milestone. And the Miles Davis quote of music is the time between beats, for me is the reminder of that, where it's like you can create a beautiful life, a beautiful sound without focusing on the highlight reel.
Stop and smell the roses.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that enough. What advice do you have to someone who is on the brink of facing bankruptcy, which is a position you are in? Someone who feels like they're about to lose everything. Do you have any words of wisdom for someone going through something like that?
Well, I think first and foremost, keep going. Don't freeze, don't stop. Like, keep going in that moment. Whoop was on the edge of dying a few times. And in those moments, I just kept picking up the phone. I kept calling. I kept trying to find a solution. And I did that days up to even in one case bankruptcy. And I was able to find a way through, or find a way around, or find someone who believed as much as I believed. And the lesson I got from that was a very different lesson than if Whoop had failed. I think if Whoop had failed, I would have learned a lot of maybe the wrong lessons. Oh, your idea was too ambitious, or the market was timed poorly, or it was because you were a first-time entrepreneur, you weren't ready. Whereas having overcome that moment, the lesson I learned was more of one around resilience and persistence and no quit. Like, do not quit. Just keep pushing through. And if you can really embody that and take it to the highest level, I think it gives you another chance. And it gives you more chances than you even realize when you're in the moment.
Well, thanks, Will. I really appreciated this conversation. I love what you do for many reasons, but specifically because you are in the business of wellness at a time when many people are maybe thinking of themselves or thinking of selling a product or goods to consumers that maybe aren't good for health. Here you are showing people how to get healthy from someone who's been through the trenches, realized that, oh my God, this product I could have used when I was younger, so let me design something that is good for future generations. It really excites me every time I see a strap on someone's hand because it tells me that they're serious about their health. So I appreciate what you do. It's a very, you don't need me to tell you that it's a noble and honorable profession. And I just wish you all the luck. I mean, from bankruptcy to 3.6 billion, Yeah, I'd like to see that number at 7.2 in the next few years. Thank you for your time, and thank you what you do for society.
Thank you, brother. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.